In this video, I'm going to show you how to take an extra large men's shirt and turn it into a ruffled women's blouse using this as my inspiration. For this project, you'll need an oversized men's shirt with a lot of length and volume. For reference, mine was a men's extra large, and I wear a small or medium-sized women's shirt. And you'll also need 2 pieces of 1/4 inch elastic for the sleeves. In this video, I'm going to go over the entire process I used to refashion this shirt, from coming up with the idea and planning the project, as well as the cutting and the sewing. So if you have an idea for a refashion, but aren't sure how to make it a reality, maybe this will give you some ideas. However, if you want to skip right to the main tutorial, it starts at 2 minutes 51 seconds. So what comes first, the idea or the shirt? Well, it depends, but the shirt is very important. Different types of shirts lend themselves to different types of refashions. For example, if a shirt is form-fitting, you can simply change out the collar or the sleeves. However, if it's large and flowy like this one, it's a good candidate for something with ruffles and gathers. Once I have a general idea of what I want to do with the shirt, I look for images to help me plan how to make it. I usually come up with one image that serves as my main inspiration, but I also look for similar styles to explore different options. Online clothing resellers are great because they often show clothing details. Then I list what pieces I'll need and what parts of the shirt to get them from. For this project, it was ruffles, a small facing, sleeve casings, and drawstrings. Since this shirt had short sleeves, most of the pieces had to come from the bottom of the shirt, and so I had to make sure there was enough fabric to accommodate them. I listed the measurements of the original shirt, measurements of similar clothes, and measurements of what I thought I would need, and compared them. This involved a lot of math. I also did some tests at this point, like for the size of the ruffles, the width of the casings and of the drawstrings, and how to create an opening at the front of the shirt. Once I had a plan, I made a diagram of how to cut the shirt, and that's it. I was ready to go. So let's get started. Try on the shirt and align the shoulder seam to your shoulder and mark the length. Mark the neckline depth you want, keeping in mind that the gathers will pull the top up. Finally, mark how long you want the shirt to be. Measure the distances of the shoulder, neckline, and hem, and make a note of them because we're going to need them later. Cut off the collar close to the stand. Cut off the button plackets. And fold the shirt in half along the center of the back. This will become the front so that the seam will be in the back. Mark the shoulder and neckline depth on the back and shoulder folds. And add a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Adding seam allowance means moving closer towards the collar, not further away. Draw the front neckline scoop. You can use a plate if that helps, and make sure the front of the neckline is perpendicular to the fold to avoid creating a point. Bring the line to meet the original neckline near the back. Cut on the line all the way around the neckline. To cut the ruffles, casings, and drawstrings, fold the shirt in half, front to back, with the side seams aligned, and mark the fabric. You'll need to cut one strip 3.5 inches wide for the ruffle, Then cut 3 rows of 1-inch strips for the casings and drawstrings. So you'll need at least 6.5 inches of fabric, and more if your hem is curved, so keep that in mind. Originally I wanted to use drawstrings in the sleeves, so I cut 4 rows, but that didn't work out, so 3 rows of 1-inch strips should be enough. If you don't have enough fabric, you can make the 1-inch strips, which are for the casings and the drawstring, from another piece of fabric. Remove the seams from the ruffles and the strips. From the upper scrap of the shirt, cut a small rectangle to be used as a facing for the front opening, 2 inches wide by 3 inches long. My neckline was a little too long in comparison with the length of the ruffle, so I trimmed 2 inches from the back seam. Ideally, the ruffle should be about 1.5 times the size of the neckline, and mine was a little less than that, but it should work. Okay, now we're ready to sew. Sew up the back seam and finish with your method of choice. I used a French seam, which works well on straight seams like this and gives a nice clean finish. To make a French seam, sew on the right side of the fabric with the wrong sides facing each other, back tacking at the beginning and end. Trim the seam allowance to about 1/8 inch from the seam. Turn the shirt inside out, fold it on the seam and press. Sew a second seam with the folded edge aligned with the side of the presser foot. Back tack at the beginning and end. You can see how a French seam makes a nice clean finish with all the edges encased inside the fabric. Pin the seam to one side so it doesn't get twisted later. You can also sew the first seam very close to the edge, and then you won't need to trim it, but this requires more skill. To prepare the front facing, iron a small hem around the facing on 3 sides. On the wrong side of the fabric, draw a 2-inch line down the center. Fold the shirt to find the front center and mark it. Place the facing on the center of the shirt with the right sides facing each other and pin into place. Sew around the 3 sides of the line at a distance of about 1/8 of an inch. Cut between the stitches as close to the corners as you can without clipping the stitches. Fold the edges of the facing under and press. Top stitch around the 3 edges of the facing as close to the fold as possible. To prepare the ruffle, sew the strips together. Use whatever seam you prefer, but I used a flat felled seam because it lays flat and is clean on both sides. To sew a flat felled seam, place the pieces with the right sides of the fabric facing each other and sew with a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Trim one side only down to about 1/8 of an inch or so. Fold the longer seam allowance over the raw edge, press, then fold again and press again. Stitch down the folded edge, and now you have a seam which lays flat and looks neat on both sides. Next, I hemmed the ruffles. Because I wanted the hem to be small and dainty, I ironed a tiny hem along the bottom of the ruffle, about 1/8 of an inch wide, and then folded it up again and ironed it again. Then I sewed it into place, keeping as close to the fold as possible. Hem the short edges of the ruffle using the same procedure. There are many ways to create ruffles, and the one I use takes a little more effort, but the ruffles come out fairly even. To sew the ruffles, make a gathering stitch using the longest stitch setting on the machine and sew as close to the edge as possible. Leave the ends of the threads long and do not back tack. Sew a second row of stitches parallel to the first. You can also use a single row, but the gathers will be a little more difficult to control. With the shirt inside out, pin the ends of the ruffle to either side of the facing, with the right side of the ruffle facing the wrong side of the shirt. Gather the ruffle until it's the same size as the neckline. Distribute the gathers evenly and pin into place. Attach the ruffle to the shirt by sewing in between the two rows of gathering threads. Check the gathers to make sure you like the way they look, then remove the gathering threads and trim the seam allowances to 1/4 inch. Turn the shirt right side out, fold the ruffle down and iron it flat. Sew a row of stitches parallel to the fold to create the channel for the drawstring. It should be wide enough to accommodate a safety pin. Next, try on the shirt to decide the length of the hem. My shirt turned out kind of short, so I'm going to make the hem as small as possible. In general, a wider hem will drape better, but since it requires more fabric, I'm going with a tiny hem using the same technique I used on the ruffle. To make the sleeve casings, select two 1-inch strips of fabric long enough to go around the sleeve. If yours aren't long enough, you can sew the sections together to make them longer. Add a 1/2 inch for seam allowance and cut. You should have one for each sleeve. Fold up the ends a 1/2 inch and iron in place. Fold the casing in half lengthwise and iron a fold as a guideline. Fold one edge to the center fold and iron it in place, then repeat with the other side. If you've ever made your own bias tape, this is basically the same technique, and you could actually use bias tape for the casings if you prefer. Repeat the process with the casing for the other sleeve. To sew the casing to the sleeve, pin the casing to the inside of the sleeve, starting near the underarm seam. Mine is about 1/4 inch from the hem seam of the original shirt, but this will depend on how wide you want the ruffle to be. Top stitch the casing to the sleeve as close to the fold as possible. When you get to the beginning of the seam, sew over it and back tack to secure it. Repeat with the other side of the casing. Then repeat the entire process with the other sleeve and casing. My original idea was to put the casings on the outside and tie them with drawstrings, but I made a mistake in my calculations, so I had to use elastic and sew the casings to the inside instead. Cut 2 sections of elastic wide enough to go around your arm, plus 2 inches for overlap. Insert the elastic through the channel until it comes out the other side. I like to use a safety pin, but I've heard bobby pins work well too. Join the ends of the elastic together with a 1-inch overlap, making sure it doesn't get twisted. Sew the ends together using a very tight zigzag stitch. Trim the ends, then distribute the gathers evenly. To create the drawstring for the neckline, sew the strips together with the right sides facing until it's long enough to go around the neckline, plus 32 inches for the bow. For reference, mine was 62 inches long. Iron the seams open, then fold the strip in half lengthwise and iron it. Like with the casings, fold one side to the center and iron it in place. Then fold the other side to the center, iron it in place, and continue along the length of the entire drawstring. Then fold both sides together and give the entire strip a good press. Sew along the sides of the drawstring as close to the edge as possible. It can be tricky to start sewing so close to the edge of the fabric, so you can pull on the threads in the back to help move the fabric along. The final step is to thread the drawstring through the channel and around the neckline. Then tie knots in the ends of the drawstring. And that's it, we're done. And here's the result. First, I wanted to show you what the shirt looks like from the inside. As you can see, it looks like a professionally made blouse because most of it is. These are all the original seams, and the seams I added are the ones that are really easy to sew. So someone with basic sewing skills can make this top. And here it is on Griselda. One nice thing about this blouse is that the neckline is adjustable, so you can make it smaller or larger as you prefer. It's also very cool and breezy, so a perfect blouse for summer or spring. If I were to do this refashion again, I'd probably want the shirt to be a bit longer. So I'd use a different fabric for the casings and take a bit off the width of the ruffle to give the body a little more length. But otherwise, I'm very happy with the result, and I hope it inspires you to try your own refashioning project. Thanks for watching, and happy upcycling!